Welcome to Family Matters, Legal Edition, a special monthly segment of the Business of Family podcast. I'm Tammy Buss, family business advisor and founder of Blue Roots.
And I'm Yola Ventresca, managing partner at Lerners LLP. Together, we're diving into the legal issues that impact family businesses, from succession and shareholder agreements to conflict resolution and governance.
Whether you're in the founder's seat, part of the next generation, or advising a family-run company, this series is here to help you navigate the legal side of legacy with clarity and confidence.
Join us every third Tuesday of the month for real talk, real stories, and practical legal insights.
Because in family business, the law isn't just about protecting assets, it's about protecting relationships.
Well, hello everyone. I'm really excited today to have my law partner with me, Reid. Erin is the practice group leader of our family law group at Lerners. Erin is what I will say a lawyer's lawyer. She is someone who is pragmatic, smart as a whip, but also one of the most approachable people you'll ever meet. She has a real depth of expertise in family law, and specifically how family law intersects with family businesses. So I was delighted that she took me up on my offer to have her join us today. So welcome, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and today we're actually going to be talking about how family law and family business intersect, which is really interesting, and how to avoid some of the most common mistakes that can jeopardize both your family and your business. So it's going to be a fun episode today.
I think so. Erin, before we get started, do you want to share a bit with us about your career journey and the types of cases you work on, what it's inspiring you these days, and how you made the decision to get into this area of law?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a family lawyer for 21 years now. I've been at Lerners for 8 of those years. I mean, family law is just, it's my passion. We deal with, I always tell new lawyers, we deal with every area of law and family law. Obviously family businesses, but we touch on everything from criminal law to trust law to wills and estates. There's pretty much nothing that we don't touch in the course of our business, but we also deal with people. I mean, it's a very people-oriented area of law. We advocate for families. We help families get through incredibly difficult times in their lives. That's really what our goal is in our work, is to assist families to make it easier to go through what is often a very, very difficult process in people's lives. So, it's been good to me. I love it. And in terms of, what's inspiring me lately, it's never boring. Again, I say to young lawyers, if you want a really exciting area of law to go into, family law is there for you. We do a lot of advocacy, whether it be, written advocacy or courtroom work or appeal work. We're advocating for families, advocating for children. It's never boring. It's really rewarding.
So I want to take a step back and ask you, because I'm sure listeners are probably as confused as I am, what is the difference between like divorce, separation, marriage contracts, and, throw in a family business or family ownership in there. So can you kind of just give us a brief description of the differences between them?
Yeah, well, family businesses from the perspective of family law are their assets that need to be addressed in some capacity when people separate. The other way that we touch on family businesses is to deal with them before people even get married.
That's a tough one though, right? Because you're saying maybe to your kids or your prospective spouse, oh, by the way, you can't have my business.
Yeah, it can be. Although I find when it comes to family businesses, if the two spouses aren't involved, if it's one spouse's family, I find that can be the less adversarial piece of a marriage contract, because it's not marital property. It's something that one spouse is effectively getting through their
Very
family,
interesting.
right? So
Like an inheritance.
exactly. So it doesn't have anything to do with the other spouse.
What if you inherited it before you got married?
It happens a lot. Although, in a case like that, you want to make sure you have a marriage contract because the laws around inheritance differ depending on when you received property, whether you received it before the marriage or during the marriage. I mean, I always say if there's a family business and you're getting married, or even if you're living together or planning to live with somebody, a marriage contract or a cohabitation agreement, which is what we do for parties who don't intend to marry, they just plan to live together. They're vital because what you don't want to happen is in the event of separation, your family gets dragged into the conflict and the family business becomes a source of potentially litigation or certainly stress and conflict because your spouse may acquire rights to either the growth and the value of the business over the course of the relationship, or if they work in the business in any capacity or contribute to the business in any capacity, they can have arguments that they should receive something from the business, even so far as to argue that they should have some form of ownership.
Wow.
So,
So I'm just going to step back a bit. So the first thing you should have is a cohabitation agreement if you're working or living together.
Living together.
Then the second thing is if you're planning on getting married, you would change that to a marriage contract?
yes, I mean, the cohabitation agreement will contemplate marriage, but I like to have an actual marriage contract if there's going to be a wedding. Because the laws do change, particularly around property when parties are married as opposed to living together. Because the Family Law Act, which governs this particular area in Ontario, gives married people specific rights around property that grow during the marriage.
Right.
So if you don't have you don't have a specific marriage contract, you may not be protecting those marriage specific rights and obligations properly.
And so then I'd like to come back to that a little bit, but I do want to go into separation and divorce.
Yes,
Because I think they sort of get lumped in together.
they do.
So give me a Coles Notes version of the differences.
Yeah, it's a great question and a common question. Separation is effectively the intention of one party to separate from the other that's communicated to the other spouse. So separation doesn't terminate the marriage, but it's an important date because as family lawyers, that's when we value the property.
Right.
So we also call it the valuation date.
And people can be living together and still have that separation date.
They can.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
many do, right?
They do.
Yeah.
And it can sometimes be tricky. That
right.
we have cases where we have to, that's the first issue we have to sort out is what is the separation date? Because we can't move forward with the financial disclosure process, the valuation of assets, debts, etc., to resolve the issues until we agree on a separation date. Or, in some cases, the court has to decide. Or in private litigation, an arbitrator will have to decide, okay, this is the separation date. And it's based on a pattern of behavior, right? So how did the parties live while they were living together? Did they eat meals together? Did they share a bedroom? Did they give each other cards? Yeah, it's not very romantic. That particular type of litigation, because I've actually seen cards that spouses have given each other end up in affidavits.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so as evidence that the parties are still together. So yeah, it can, you hope you don't have those threshold conflicts.
And then divorce is the actual, just the written sort of stamp of approval, right?
Believe it or not, I often call it the easy part. Because
No,
You just pay
right,
and away you go?
yeah, because it is a bit of a formality for us because it's all the other stuff. People think, oh, getting divorced is so hard or so expensive or whatever. It's not the divorce itself. It's all the other things that need to be resolved. So the divorce actually requires a judge's stamp in the court. But, 31 days after you get that stamp, you're formally no longer husband and wife. And one thing is you cannot get remarried until you're divorced, obviously. But that's the only.
Is it obvious, or have you had give us
Well,
some stories to tell us?
We sometimes have to rush the divorce because people move on, you know, and the separation process can take a while.
Yeah.
So, you know, people meet new people, and all of a sudden they decide they want to get remarried and they're not divorced yet. So we do have to sometimes get things into court on a quick basis.
I wouldn't be able to get through this episode without asking Erin for her hot take on the Astronomer CEO Coldplay concert debacle. I think
would that be a separation?
I saw that the family law lawyers on social media popping up everywhere to represent one or the other of the disgruntled spouses.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's that is definitely a pattern of behavior that would constitute
and in HR, and she's in HR, which is
that's my
hilarious.
That's as an employment lawyer, and then someone who deals with workplace culture. That was what I jumped on. But it was very funny to see the family lawyers jump up and start introducing themselves to what we assume were the disgruntled spouses. Anyways, I took us down a bit of a rabbit hole there.
Oh, that's good. You know what? Those are funny rabbit holes. We can get into a whole section on, what are the rights of those people in those events. But anyway, let's take it back into family law. I just want one more question about the businesses, because I do get asked a lot as a family business advisor how to protect the business from, a divorce or separation, or from people who are living together. Like, is there any, do they have the business at risk here?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first step is to try to deal with it either before marriage or during the marriage, which is the contract or cohabitation agreement. But if that doesn't happen, I mean, the key around family businesses is to make sure that the paperwork indicates that any shares or a transfer of business assets are gifted to the person receiving them from their family. Because, one of our exclusions in family law from the sort of sharing of marital property is gifts and inheritances.
Right.
Okay, so, just in the legislation itself, those types of assets are excluded. So the paperwork around share transfers and stuff like that, I always say make sure it's very clear that if you're giving your adult child or whatever, shares in the business or assets of the business, make sure that the gifting paperwork is done properly, and that's usually involves, estate lawyers or corporate lawyers, and we sometimes work with them to ensure that those things are done. But if that paperwork's done properly, then the argument's already there for your family lawyer, right? To say those are gifted or inherited assets, so they don't come into the sharing of property if there's a separation.
Does it open up, the books for the spouse who's separating? So the non-family member spouse, like, does that become part? Like, they now have access to the documents of the business. If you don't have it all properly documented, how do you avoid that, I guess, is the question.
You really can't. I mean, if it's coming in as a family asset that needs to be valued, and understand that, the Family Law Act doesn't give, the other spouse a right of ownership to a family business unless they're making some sort of, claim that they worked in it or contributed money to it that would give them some sort of ownership interest. But if it's just being included in marital property for the purpose of figuring out who has more when we split the difference effectively, then we have to value the business. And in order to do that, we often retain business valuators. So we have some amazing people we work with in town who do family law specific valuations of businesses at the date of separation and date of marriage, which are the two important dates. But they have to look at the books.
Right.
And the other side has a right to see them. Yeah. One thing about family law is you can't hide anything.
No, and it's a family business. Like, you're a family business, it's not public. So they tend to keep a lot of things pretty close to the chest, and they don't want that information out there in the public, right?
Now, we have, privilege issues and stuff like that. And as family lawyers, we want to keep that stuff private for the parties.
Yeah.
So, we do a lot
I'm
of
thinking
work.
of more the spouse that's disgruntled.
Yeah, fair enough. Although they have some obligations, so we can do confidentiality agreements, and we can do different things to insist that the information be kept private.
Right.
Just, to the parties, that it not be shared beyond the parties, because that's a reasonable thing too. Just because you're going through a separation doesn't mean that your family business information needs to be all out there in the world. And what we do as family lawyers is to keep it as protected as possible, to keep it, a private process to a private resolution, because that's reasonable.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, Erin, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about all these pitfalls one could fall into, and I think to this point we've talked a lot about a situation where it's the case that a spouse is marrying into like a pre-existing family business, right? So whether their partner has been gifted, a right to the family business, or they, they're gifted it afterwards, and the spouse doesn't have much to do with it. If maybe we could turn to a scenario, and you can provide us some advice, but on the scenario where two people get together, they cohabitate, or they are
That's getting together.
Yeah, they're getting together. They cohabit. They're cohabitating, or they're married, and they start to build a business together. And we know historically that it may not be so much the case now, but for example, one is a professional, a registered professional, say a dentist or an accountant, and the spouse is doing the books and is at the front desk, and they build this business together, so to speak. So, if they start off with nothing, let's say they're both in school, and then this business develops throughout the course of the relationship and then breaks down. If you were telling two people who are, contemplating cohabitating or getting married, and a family business is likely in their future, what are some of the pitfalls that you want to avoid? I assume it's like very much like asking for a marriage. Or is it the clauses that go into a marriage contract where this is like a contemplation, a dream of ours, but it hasn't yet taken off to the point where it's worth anything?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? When you have that type of situation, you certainly want one of those contracts that we talked about, because the intention of the contract is to tell the story if there's a separation, to make it easy, right? So you're separate years after you get together. You separate, okay, what do we do now? Well, you pull that contract out of the drawer and it tells you what you're supposed to do. Ideally, right? But, it's a great question. If two people, have a business together, and they don't always hold shares equally and that type of thing. It comes down to who owns the company, potentially, unless it's protected by the marriage contract. But we also have, equity issues in family law, right? Mm-hmm. So, if a party has contributed, considerably to a family business over the years, they can make arguments that they should receive something from the business, even if they're not a shareholder. If they're a shareholder, we look to that and figure out, is one person going to buy out the other shares? And that type of thing, just like we deal with matrimonial homes. Is one person going to buy the other person out and keep it going? It's that type of situation. But, where it gets more complicated is if one party says, well, I own this business, and the other party says, no, I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that business. And you can end up with what we call a joint family venture claim, where even if the parties don't share the business equally, there's a claim that they should. It's we deal with that a lot. But the advice goes back to the same thing. If you're going to have a business together, have a contract, live by what you say in the contract you want to happen. When somebody's an employee of another spouse, of their spouse's business, that is complicated.
Right.
Well,
right.
In your scenario, if you're both students and you leave school and one's a dentist and you're like, okay, we're boyfriend, girlfriend, we're not living together or anything, but let's open an office.
Yeah.
And you have the professional, and then you have the one running the front end, right? And they're doing the back end. then they live together, then they get married, and then, they go off on mat leave or something, then that is complicated, right? Because did they start the business together, or was one working for the other? Like, how did they, is this where shareholder agreement should come in right from the get-go, or?
Well, this is where Erin and I start to talk to one another, right? Because there's some employment issues here as well.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
You have to, and there is a lot of communication between our lawyers at Lerners. And one of the great things about the firm, as I've said, is that, see, when you run into an issue like this, if it was just me working on my own, I'd have to send my client to Erin if she was at a place where there wasn't any employment lawyers, and we'd say, okay, well, how are we going to deal with this? Now you have two counsel, two retainers here. Erin picks up the phone, she calls over. It's a bit seamless that way, and the shameless plug to say that's one of the real benefits of having our firm,
a larger firm, yeah.
Because these types of issues touch on all different areas of your life.
You don't tend to think about doing any contracting or anything when you're younger.
And so if you're working and you're saying, okay, well, we're going to work together in this asset, I'm just going to contribute because I love you, and this is part of.
I got a business degree,
and but you're not technically an employee, and you don't have any of the ESA protections. But on the other hand, it's not clear that you're a shareholder either, right?
Yeah. Oh, and it happens.
That's right,
all the time. And I always say, that I'm absolutely referring them to Yola or someone else in the employment. I'm like, don't just fire your spouse. That's a bad course of action. You would definitely want to come see us. Because we'll help you through that process. It's complicated, and it can give rise to other arguments around spousal support, these type of things, or wrongful dismissal, or different things. And so you have to be careful, and it's a very common situation upon separation that you have one spouse working in the other's business, and you definitely need
It's not comfortable for anybody.
It isn't. And, I always say you want to treat your spouse, carefully and respectfully upon separation, or it can lead to problems as we try to resolve it.
So, Erin, let's say we have individuals who have taken your advice and have laid down the framework. What life events or events in the life of the business would you want a trigger to go off for them to say, I need to go back to Erin now because we need to update this? Is that the birth of a child? Is it the business achieving some degree of material success? I mean, what are we have the foundation in place, but now the expectations of the parties have perhaps changed given that their life circumstances have changed.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's a great question. I mean, certainly if the ownership structure is going to change, if the spouse is going to, retain any sort of shareholding or anything like that, you need a new contract. But also, if the business does very well, it could make other things in your contract what we call unconscionable. And it can put your contract at risk, because if, for example, it's a small business when you get together, but it takes off and you're making all kinds of money, and you have what we call a spousal support release.
And that means that you're released from
having to pay. Both parties are neither party has to pay the other person's spousal support, or what they call in the States alimony, in the event that you separate. We often put releases of that in these contracts. But if one party is doing extremely well, and the other party is either not doing, doesn't have that same type of income, or has prioritized their lives differently, like looking after children or various things, those spousal support releases can be what the court, that's their word, but unconscionable, meaning they're just so unfair that they make the whole contract, it stinks, right? And it can be overturned. And therefore, we want these contracts to be upheld. So we do see people come back after, especially, and the other thing is people who have long relationships. Because maybe what you agreed to when you first started out, over time starts to feel not right. It happens, particularly if there's, significant growth in wealth or income. you know, you want to come back and have another look at it and say, okay, well, what makes sense now that we've had this partnership for so long? Because, you know, with longevity of a relationship becomes a lot of give and take. And
It's a really good way to put it.
yeah, and you know, you give this other person many years of your life. I'm not saying it needs to be rewarded, but if you separate and you have a contract that is just so blatantly in favor of one side,
Right.
and not the other.
Because at the beginning you might have said, well, look at you put most of the sweat and tears into this, so you know you should get 70% or 80%. I'm just a little bit. But if you look down the road 30, 40 years,
right,
and you've created this big you know, business, or maybe one has sacrificed
that's right,
to stay home and raise the children or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah, I guess you don't really think about that. You think, oh no, I've got this contract. I've done this. I did it 30 years ago.
well, and you don't want it. It's smart to do it because it can save your contract. It's an amending contract is what we
Right.
call it, and you know, because if the court deems your contract unconscionable, they can set it aside, which can put your assets at risk. So, you know, including a family business. So, you know, you want to think about that if you've been together for a while and say, okay, I want to make sure that if we do separate, you know, this will be something that is fair.
It's really interesting though, because I would think that like some of your clients would be resistant to that idea, especially if the original contract was you know, really
their
swayed
favor,
in their
yeah.
favor, right?
Yeah.
But you go to Erin and she's going to tell you that the court is going to look at that contract and say, this is not fair. It gets ripped up. And then
Right.
you have no control over what might be imposed on you.
That's right. And, you know, so if your contract's not enforceable, you know, it's in the court's hands. So, you know, there's that level of reasonableness and fairness that, you know, that I think that is expected between spouses, and the longer the relationship and the more give and take and sacrifices that are made, the more you have to think about maybe coming back and having another look. But, you know, those are all things that we can discuss with parties when they
Yeah.
come in and give recommendations around.
Well, it's always the starting out of a business, right? Because you go in, you're just starting a business, not worth anything, so you don't really care about having all the right agreements and things in place. But where I see now, as a family business advisor, is the next generation,
Yes.
right? They're looking at their kids and they go, okay, well, now we have this $100 million business or $10 million business, it doesn't matter. And now I've got kids who are getting married. And the last thing I want is, because maybe from a tax perspective, you want the kids to be involved in some kind of share ownership, but you don't want the new particular spouse to get any
That's right.
benefit from it. So any tips on what you can do around there?
We see that a lot, you know, and we do see the parents involved in terms of the contracts. Sometimes both sides have parents who have businesses. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes there's some difficult conversations that have to happen. But if you really want those interests protected, then, you know, there has to be a certain level of disclosure. I mean, the whole key with marriage contracts is so, you know, one of the spouses can't say later, well, I didn't know you had all that stuff, or I never would have signed it.
Right.
So,
right.
You know, sometimes I have people who are reluctant to disclose what their business is worth or have, you know, anybody look at the books. But I say, well, then he or she's just going to argue later that they didn't know what it was worth. And they're going to say, how did I know what I was giving up if I didn't know what it was worth? So, you know, the importance of disclosure and valuation, that's where it comes from. So sometimes those are difficult conversations to have with the parents of, you know, because it's their business, right? You know, it doesn't even belong to the, you know, the next generation yet, or, you know, but if you really want those assets protected from sharing in that marriage, it's got to be done right. And there's got to be full and frank disclosure.
So it's not just the marriage contract, but shareholder agreements and things like that?
Yeah.
So you're sort of layering on protection?
That's right. You know, and, you know, within reason. I mean, we often deal with the counsel for the other side who have certain requests. They want to see certain documents to satisfy themselves as to, you know, what the business is worth, et cetera. And sometimes, you know, they're like, that's enough. You know, we get it. This is a family business and our client doesn't have a right to it. But that's the process of the negotiation. We
It's
also
hard.
need some time for those.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we get approached, oh, we're getting married in 2 weeks. And
Mm-hmm.
I say, I like a nice healthy 9-month timeline. But it's not always possible.
Yeah.
But
So what do you do if the kids are already married?
you can still enter into a marriage contract when you're already married.
And
That's
do you
a
have
lot
to
of people don't know that.
disclose? So I've just wondered about that, because let's say the business is, for argument's sake, $10 million,
Yeah.
just to pick an easy number, and you've got two children, and anyway, the business is going to be divided equally amongst the two kids, and you want a marriage contract. Does that mean that the current spouse has to know the value of the family business, even though they're not entitled to it just yet? Or, I mean, it could be sold, there could be a lot of things happening. So when you're talking about full disclosure, does that spouse of the child of the business owner need to have all that information?
Yes. In fact, that's the
That would
person who
stop
really
a lot
needs
of
to have it.
businesses, right? Business owners. I mean, I think it's great, because I think that disclosure it saves them a lot of money and stress. But it's that.
Well, there's pushback.
Wow.
I mean, and I
Yeah.
get it, right? I mean, that's your family business, and those people don't feel like, oh, they want to have those. I get it from both sides, but my job as a family lawyer is for you to have a contract that's enforceable,
Right.
and I have to have those conversations, and it's not always. People don't always want to hear it, They're like, oh, I got to do all this disclosure, but. And I say, but you want it to be worth the paper it's written on if it ever
Right.
gets challenged. And if your spouse can say, well, I didn't know it was worth that, or I didn't know you had all that, then they're going to say, I didn't sign this contract in an informed way.
Right.
And that's a legal argument they can have to try to get it set aside. So it's worth it to do it right, even though I get why, the owners of family businesses are reluctant sometimes.
Yeah. Now, one more question around that. So, because I get this all the time, is the child has not received any shares, or doesn't work in the business, but they get a lot of benefits
Yes.
from the business. And then there is a separation. Is that the type of thing that should also be in a marriage contract?
Absolutely. I mean, I often put language in my contracts about, the fact that one of the spouses may enjoy, certain things from their family wealth, and resulting in benefits to them that will not result in the other spouse, acquiring anything.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's very common. But in terms of if they don't own anything yet, then it doesn't have to be valued, depending. I mean, that's the other thing is if they don't currently own anything, but they're gonna receive shares, in a year, or like just around the corner from when the agreement is negotiated, the disclosure should happen.
Right.
So if
Or in a
there's
death, you never know when death's going to occur, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes people will say to me, "Well, I don't currently own any shares in the company." But then in the course of our discussions, they'll say, "But I'm receiving some next year." And I'll say, "Well,
Right.
I think you should disclose that, because even though you don't technically own anything now, if you knew you were going to be receiving, significant wealth in the near future, it's probably something we should deal with now."
Erin, is there anything that, so you're going along fine. You've got your contract in place, and what triggers? We've talked about like significant events. Positive events. I was talking about, like the birth of a child, or, the growth of the business. But on the flip side, what are, like red flashing lights that tell you, okay, like I need to go back and review what's in place now because something has gone. Like what should be those? Or can you give us kind of a list of things that if they happen, you should consider reviewing?
The caution light, and
Caution
the flashing
the
yellow, and then the flashing red.
Yeah, the flashing yellow and the flashing. Well, hopefully you get a yellow before you
get the red. Yeah. Sometimes it might go from green right to red.
Yes.
That's a great question. I mean, any significant thing that happens in the marriage that impacts on either party's, wealth or situation, may want, you may want to have another look, or you may not want to. I mean, you've sort of touched on the big ones, which would be any, change in the ownership of the business, any significant, injections of wealth on either side, significant growth in income. Children, maybe not. I mean, you can't contract out of child support anyways. That's
Right.
one thing, some people are surprised by. But, in family law, child support's the right of the children.
Yeah.
It's not the right of either parties.
Right.
Often it gets paid from one party to another, one spouse to another, but it's still fundamentally the right of the children. So people do sometimes put, neither party will have to pay child support to the other. There's no point, because that's not enforceable in law.
What about, we just, you're talking about the situation of getting caught on the webcam. Is there anything in there for humiliation or...
I've seen some crazy things in marriage contract.
It's like, oh my goodness.
The issue is whether
like
it's
ethically, morally.
Yeah, there's the issue is enforceability, right? Because we can't really in family law.
The moral code.
Yeah,
that's right.
The moral code. Yeah, we can't really contract around behavior. You can try, right? You can say you'll get nothing if you have an affair, or you'll get stuff like that, clauses that people try to put in.
Right.
But, and if the other side is like, okay, well, that's in the contract, so I guess, I get nothing, and they say nothing, then I guess you got away with it. But if that was to ever be challenged in court and that person was deserved of spousal support, on the basis of other things, the fact that they had an affair isn't going to keep them from getting support, because we don't have fault-based family law, at least not in Ontario, rightly
Sometimes
or wrongly.
You think you should,
rightly
but
or
I mean,
wrongly,
depends on what side of the fence you're on.
And that's a hard thing for parties to accept sometimes, because it's why it's a great question, because you're talking about people separating from their spouse, not a business partner, and it makes it very emotional. And these things do happen, and they do impact people's ability to be reasonable, or to hurt people. It's hard sometimes to be reasonable in negotiating with someone who hurt you.
And it's not just about your spouse, but it can be the business that you're separating from as well.
It can be very complicated.
So it's very complicated when you have family and business. And this is why I think it's so important to understand and to have the right contracting in place. And even if you have to go after the fact, because I don't think a lot of parents whose children get married really think about having contracts in place for them, because they haven't given them any shares yet.
Yeah.
So they don't see that future value. And as we've mentioned, there's that transition because it's a planned transition, but there's also a transition that's unplanned, which is a death or a disability of some sort, right?
Or the other thing is people will, one mistake parents make with their children is they'll ask their child to pay them something for that asset. That defeats a gift or an inheritance.
Oh, true.
And it's something we see all the time. And that's why I say be careful when the wealth transfer happens. It has to be done right. And we don't see it until after the fact as family lawyers, and we deal with the outcome of how it was transferred.
Right.
But, if you're insisting that your adult child give you something back for transferring property, be careful. Because then, suddenly it's not a gift anymore.
Right.
It's, that's consideration.
Good point. Yeah.
And again, we have, our corporate group also works with Erin quite often, our wills and estates group too. You want to make sure that you're covered.
Everything's in line.
And that goes back to what Erin said at the beginning of the podcast in terms of family law really is the intersection of a bunch of different areas of law. I mean,
I really thought of it like that.
Yeah. It's a convergence of, Erin has to be considering the wills and estates piece, the corporate piece, the employment piece. And so it is a very, very complex area of law, especially when you inject the family business piece.
Well, and that's why this podcast is here.
It is. Why don't you just say, if someone's listening to this and they say, well, I haven't done anything. What's your one takeaway that you'd want people to walk away with and implement right now if they're in a situation where they are in a family business and people are married in, let's say, to the family business? Get a contract?
Understand the business.
Yeah.
I mean, and understand your finances and hers or his. Ask some questions. It's amazing how many spouses live in marriages where they know very little about their spouse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's actually incredible to me, or even about their own finances. Mm-hmm. So, you don't want to be too obvious about it or, get weird, but, I
could say I was just listening to this podcast, honey, and I think we should sit down and have a discussion.
Yeah, because whether you end up separating or not, it's important to know about your own finances and about your spouse's, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent advice.
Yeah, excellent, and really fascinating, Erin. And I think that the fact that we're out of time shows us that there's so much more we could talk to you about. So we are going to definitely bring you back for part 2. And really want to thank you so much for bringing your expertise to the podcast and making your podcast debut with us. Yeah. And I can't recommend Erin enough. Not only an excellent lawyer, but a real person of integrity. So I would encourage anyone listening who's going through some of these issues to reach out to her.
Thank you, Yola. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming in. Thanks for listening to Family Matters Legal Edition. We hope today's conversation gave you something to think about or talk about in your own family business.
If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who'd benefit from hearing it.
Have a legal question or topic you'd like us to cover in a future episode? Reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time, remember, in family business, what's legal is personal. Take care. The information shared in this podcast is for general educational purposes only and is not intended as legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create a lawyer-client relationship. For advice specific to your situation, please consult a qualified legal professional.